Welcome to Moon. This is Britton, and I'm very proud to be saying that for the first time ever, I'm making a video of Moon so that I can share it with my YouTube channel that I've been slowly growing over the last few months, just sharing audios from Moon to Moon. I was uh always I always knew that I would get into YouTube at some level. When I was first learning astrology, I devoured astrology in YouTube, and I feel a lot of affection for the accessibility and the library resource that YouTube is, and just kind of always knew I'd eventually get over there. But it just felt always like one more thing I got to think about doing. And so I've been just very slowly allowing myself to come into YouTube organically, imperfectly, emergently. And so here I am. I didn't plan this morning that I was going to make video, but I just was like, I want to do video today. And that's just how my business runs, is I wait until I feel really excited about something, and then I'm doing it. So welcome to my YouTube channel. Please subscribe and like. um, and hello to all y'all listening in podcast format. It's me, your host. So today I want to talk to you about something that's really important to me, and I think a really powerful conversation to have. And that is thinking about charts and what a confrontation they are. Like, charts are, but the birth chart is very confronting. And I don't feel like this is often discussed. So I learned about how confronting the birth chart is through showing up with clients and then holding space for student group after student group after student group, where I began to really see, wow, this is a really confronting thing, this whole chart business. And so the theme of this episode is going to be feeling into our fears, resistances, objections to the chart, especially so that I can invite you into my approach to charts and how I'm inviting you to connect to your chart, specifically for my new offering, Unshaming Your Chart, that begins December 18th. You will learn a whole lot about yourself and your relationship to charts, whether you join the class or not, from listening to this episode. So the thing that I began to notice very early on in my astrological career, which really began in 2018. I had my first client after discovering my chart in 2017 in the fall. That's a pretty quick window from discovering that charts exist to someone who's paying me money to talk to them about their chart. My astrological business, my practice, my professional life as an astrologer has moved very, very, very quickly. And I now have thousands of people who've moved through my school, my online school, where I teach astrology. I teach on business and mysticism. Mysticism in general is central to my life. And I've become known the last couple of years for my work on shame and speaking about shame and unshaming with the language of astrology. So to me, unshaming is a mystical practice. And I see my mysticism and unshaming as basically the same thing, because they're both about multidimensionality, which is something that we can get into as we go here, where I can show you and guide you into understanding how unshaming is a mystical practice for inviting in your multidimensionality. That's what it is. Okay. I've never defined it that way before. I'm doing it right now. Yes. Yeah. You may not think that, you hear the term unshaming and your brain's not going to mysticism probably. But that's what's actually happening, because it's inviting you into your multidimensionality, which includes your complexity, your contradictions, and your paradoxes, which astrology is uniquely positioned to help you understand, because the chart and the zodiac together show paradox and contradiction. That's what they do. That's part of how the chart is confrontational, because most of us were not conditioned to be very open to our contradictory nature, because we were taught that authenticity is consistency and not being contradictory. So we have a pairing in our minds that goodness is consistency and badness is contradiction. And so we have an issue here that prevents us from being connected to our whole self, our wholeness, because our wholeness is going to include paradox and contradiction. And astrology can help us with that. This is the core of my class, Unshaming Your Chart, beginning December 18th. If you're listening to this later, you can come in later, because in December, we're just having a meetup where I'm basically going to just be giving a huge inspirational speech. So you don't even have to be live. We're actually going to be getting into the material in January. All right. So this approach, this mystical approach that we can call unshaming, grew from my recognition about resistances and objections and fears to approaching the chart as a place for having compassion, having curiosity, having playfulness, cultivating these qualities around knowing yourself more wholly, more vastly. We often talk in our culture about how we want to be more expansive, when we want expansion. Like, this is a thing that people ostensibly want. But the piece here that's important to understand is that expansiveness comes from embracing all of yourself. That's the expansiveness, is you get bigger because more of you is allowed to be here, taking up space. And that's going to mean looking at the parts of you that you currently think are problems, that you currently feel that you have to hide or keep secret, that you think are wrong with you, that don't fit in, are problems, are not enough, are imperfect, are chaotic and messy. All of those are parts of you that the unshaming process will bring out into illumination, so that your fullness can take up more space. And thus, we're living now more expansively, thinking more expansively, creating more expansively, encouraging one another more expansively, loving more expansively. So, something that I noticed is that when we come to the chart, right? Like, when you come to your chart, and this is for those of y'all who are not close to your chart, and this is for those of y'all that are professional astrologers. This is for everyone. when we come to our chart, we have in our mind a picture of who we think we are. And there are a whole lot of things that go into this idea of our identity. There's a whole lot going on there. It's a really like loaded thing, this picture that we have of who we are, and a story about who we are, and the story about our identity. So we come into being with the chart and we have this idea. And so then we approach the chart, and there can be both a lot of fear and there can be a lot of yearning to find correspondence between who we think we are and what this thing, this circular thing with these pie shapes and these lines and these glyphs, where we have a lot of fear and desire all hooked up together around finding out what the correspondences are between that picture and who we think we are and what we think our life is about, what we think we're doing here on this planet, what we think our future is going to be, what we think about our past and what we've experienced. There's a lot of fear and there's a lot of anxiety, a lot of desire. And so this is great, because usually our fears and our desires are hidden from us. And like we don't consciously recognize all the time what we want, usually because we shame it, because some part of us thinks that we're bad for wanting it, or it contradicts another part of us. So we think that can't be possible because I'm supposed to be consistent between my desires and who I think I'm supposed to be as a good person. And so our fears and our desires are often not super in our like zone of sight. They're not really in our zone of sight. And so we come with, when we have a chance to be with the chart, there's a lot that's coming up, like, right? Like our bodies feel it. What it feels like often is contraction. What it can feel like in our bodies is a contraction against, which is like our somatic system, our nervous system protecting us from what is going to happen when we have this confrontation, and what is going to happen when we do or we don't see correspondences between who we think we are and what we think our life is about and what's there. And so I want to talk to you about some of these, because I think it would be really supportive to just like pull these up, you know, because a lot of the time the issue is not that the fear exists. It's that the fear, we're resisting looking at it. And so the struggle is in not looking at it. So it's like, let's just look at it. let's just look at it, because then we don't have to be frightened of what if it's awesome? Like, what if it's amazing? And I want to talk about some of the intelligence of the fears and what I see, like what comes up for me in the face of these fears or objections and contractions with the chart that I've seen over the years. So, you know, early on, when I was more new to this realm of conversation and more fresh out of being in social networks where nobody's talking about astrology, this one I'm going to share first felt more prevalent in my spaces but I actually really don't see this one that much. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist, though. It just means that I've set up my life such that I don't encounter this as much. But a really core one, a really core fear that we can have with our astrological charts is that we're going to be tricked by it, that we're going to be bamboozled by the chart, that there's a fear that somehow we'll be corrupted and shown and embarrassed ultimately for thinking that this map, this picture might have something for us. And so there's an internalized invalidator voice that's saying, you don't really believe in that, do you? You don't really believe in that, do you? And that's a powerful invalidation energy that is very vastly cultural and has had a long life, because the field of astrology itself has been so invalidated, shamed, and minimized over these many centuries that this is it's a really potent question. You don't really believe in that, do you? That can actually be under the surface for even those individuals who are like professional astrologers. Like, if we pretend it's not there, then we're not actually engaging with the parts of us that are afraid that we've been tricked into trusting something that is actually it's meaningless. It got us. Like, it got us that we actually believed in it. It's a scam. It's a scam. And that modern thinking minds understand that this is a pseudoscience and there's nothing for you here. So you don't really believe in that, do you? That, I think, can actually be under the surface for everyone at some level. And so it can be really helpful to just tap at it a little bit, because if it is under the surface, but it's not super conscious to us, there will be parts of ourselves that are engaging with the chart from a fear-based perspective, that, and we may then not even be conscious that we're doing that. So it can be really, really helpful to feel into that. You know, how I would respond to this is that I would say to have compassion for the conditioning that one has received against trusting in mystical wisdom traditions that have distorted our relationship to the cosmos and to the spirit and source of love in the universe itself. That, you know, we come by that very honestly, this invalidating voice. But what I found to be true is that the astrology that I'm interested in is not trying to scam and corner us into believing anything that doesn't actually resonate with us. And what I feel then is a question around trust, self-trust. The number one consequence of shame is lack of self-trust. And so what feels true to me is, if the more you cultivate self-trust, and you can do this through unshaming, the more you can trust yourself to be someone who will release and let go of anything that doesn't resonate as loving and empowering for you and true for you. Feeling true is different than being right or wrong. feeling true is not certainty. It's just a felt sense for truth that you can take or leave. And if you trust yourself to be always listening and tuning in with like, does this feel true to me? Does this feel loving to me? Or is this trying to activate my fear? Is this trying to activate my shame? Is this trying to corner me into giving my power away? Well, if you know that you're not going to engage in those things and you trust yourself, then you can go into anything. You can go into anything in this world and decide for yourself what's helpful and what's not helpful. So why would there need to be an objection to experimenting and playing with your chart, to see like, is this helpful? Is this loving? Is this empowering? Has this expanded me? Is this opened up my imagination? Oh, it has? Amazing. How can this be bad? What's so scammy about that? Maybe it is a scam. The thing is, like, when we're so entrenched against not being scammed, that's coming from shame. That's coming from shame that says that there's like something wrong with you if you believe in something that is what? It's about self-trust. It's shame is behind a lot of our hypervigilance against scams. All right. So another fear that I see with folks coming to charts, this is so common, is a fear that it will be really overwhelming because it's going to be really complicated and that there's something wrong with the way we think, or like there's a fear that you're not smart enough or that you won't be able to process it, you're not going to be able to get it, that it's going to be really exhausting for your brain, and that it's going to take forever, and that sounds exhausting. And so there's like this resistance to letting it come to you, even though there's another part of you that might really want it, because you don't want to be exhausted and overwhelmed. And even more, you don't want to be confronted with the specter of like being dumb or being not like that feeling of like, I don't get it, or that feeling of like, I'm behind in the class, or everybody's getting it but me. This is a deep wound from our education system. This is a conditioning from the kinds of spaces in which we learned how to learn. We learned how to learn in shamey spaces. And so, of course, we're going to bring that to the learning of astrology because that's what learning is to us. And so what I learned really early in my teaching of astrology is that I'm ostensibly teaching astrology, but what I'm really doing is unlearning, like teaching how to unlearn the way you learned and learn a different way. So my course, Unshaming Your Chart, is the most up-to-date and more like directly, honestly different approach to learning astrology than we're used to seeing astrology. I don't know what other teachers do, so I'm not here to take any other teachers down. I'm mostly an autodidact, so I actually really don't know how other people teach astrology. My teacher, Adam Summer, I did a one-on-one apprenticeship, so I wasn't even in a classroom space. I just am told again and again and again how supportive my approach is. And I just see what I see in the spaces, and what I see is students who are afraid to learn. This is, I think, coming from a really beautiful place. It's coming from this sincere desire to be connected to the chart, but there being a fear that like you won't be able to be connected to your chart because there's something wrong with the way you learn and you won't be able to learn it. And what I have to say about that is like I wanted to create this space so that we're not even going to be really using the word learn. We're not even using the word learn. It's unshaming your chart. That's what we're doing, because what unshaming is going to be doing is inviting you to notice what comes up for you when we're tapping at different points of your chart. And that's actually how I teach astrology and always have. It's asking you to notice what comes up when we're tapping at different things in your chart according to the guidance that I'll give you. And so all you have to do is look within yourself. Look within yourself and notice what is coming up in me. It's not about learning it all. It's not about preparing for a test. It's not about getting everything that's being said all at once. It's about listening, tuning in, and noticing what is coming up and what is feeling true for you. And what this is allowing a part of you to rise to the surface and emerge. Letting a part of you emerge that was previously hidden, revealing itself, themselves to you, so that you can see more of yourself. It's not about learning things. Of course, you will learn things, but that's not really what we're doing, because this is about feeling truth, and it's about seeing yourself. It's not about trying to track vocabulary into a library of information that you're going to be having to prove you've learned or not learned by a certain deadline, keeping up or not keeping up with your colleagues. This is a multi-level classroom, because basically all my containers are, because I think multi-level classrooms are the most potent. So it's about connecting to parts of you that are longing to be seen. And that is actually the most powerful way to learn astrology. It's just one little part of you at a time. One of my core teachings with charts is that the chart will never, never speak to you all at once. It will only ever speak to you partially to the moment you're in, connecting to you to your subjective felt experience in that moment. That's the part of your chart that's revealing itself to you. And in the revealing, you see part of you that was hidden. And from the unshaming lens, it's like letting this flower open into integration for wholeness. And this is actually how I recommend learning your charts. If you're doing this in a consistent way, month to month, year after year, your chart is going to be full of all of those moments. So it will reflect back to you in a holographic way, this animated sense of your own vastness from all those different moments. And any of those placements that you look at are going to say something different every single time that you look at it. So this to me relaxes the student in me who's like worried I've got to get it all, like worried I've got to track it all. But that's not what we're doing here. And this is actually the most embodied way of connecting to your chart and being able to really have a relationship with what it wants to show you about yourself today. There can be a really big fear with our charts that it's going to have bad news. Like, think about this. There can be a lot of resistance to getting close to your chart because there can be a lot of fear that it's going to say something about you that you don't want to hear because it's going to be scary. It's going to be bad. It's going to be very disappointing. And I think a lot of this comes from like what this raises in me is an opportunity to reflect on your own cosmology. You know, like we don't all have the same way of seeing the universe. But my perspective is one that grows from my personal cosmology, which I would want to be open about as the teacher of these approaches so that you know who this person is that's coming up with these things she's saying. And from my perspective, all the planets love you. They're all rooting for you. The whole sky is cheering you on. Your chart does have stories of hardship. It may have stories about difficulty. It may have stories about pain in it. But I don't personally, through my cosmology, do not see this as cursing you, damning you, some kind of punishment for another lifetime. I don't see it this way. That's just, I'm inviting in those who want to see it the way I do. It's your choice. Disagreement is not invalidation, I like to say. If you like playing around with this idea, it can really help with holding the fear that we're damned somehow and we've been fated. You know, astrology gets into fate. There's can be a fear that we're fated for bad things to happen. And it's really difficult to have a compassionate, loving, trusting conversation with our chart when we're carrying so much shame that it is shame that we're looking for in the chart. This isn't to say that life is going to be easy, though. It's a reframe around the fact that lots of things in life are hard. This doesn't mean that we're cursed. Like, what is it that we're learning? How are we being guided? How can we trust that we don't know what's next in the story? We don't know what's happening from the patterns of our life experiences. Is it possible? Is it possible to trust? Is it possible, or at least to play with trusting, that the grief that you feel is part of the unfolding story, that the sufferings you've been through are part of your unfolding story, that the difficulties and the pain are part of something that has not yet been revealed, and that you're being guided, and that the chart is helping you understand how you're being guided so you can co-create with that guidance in connection to your sincere desires and your sincere dreams for your time here. How does that feel? That's unshaming your chart. That's what we're doing. It's a trust process. It's a trust process. Unshaming only works when there's a desire to repair trust. As I said, the number one consequence of shame is lack of self-trust. But what also happens is there's a lack of trust in the universe. There's a lack of trust in this world. There's a lack of trust that it's safe to be here. Sincere compassion for how it's come to feel that way. And do you want to play with trusting that the planets love you and that your chart has things to say about that? That's unshaming your chart. Oh, now I feel weepy. There's another fear. There's a fear that the chart is going to somehow show you that you're not living as who you came here to be, and that it will ask of you to make changes that don't correspond with the egoic construction of identity that you've been building your whole life. And so this is going to then be a confrontation between this cosmic assignment, should you choose to entertain it, and but this is who I have to to be a good person, because shame behaviors are all about managing good personism, good person identity, or managing our badness, our perceived badness, or managing our perceived punishments for our badness. We're all a little different there. But there can be this fear that, oh God, it's going to show me that I'm actually supposed to fill in the blank. But if I do that, then I'm going to have to blah, 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 bad things that will make me look like a bad person, things that will be judged, things that will be shamed by other people, things that will be misunderstood by other people, things that are going to like make life hard. Like, what if I don't make as much money if I follow what my chart says I'm supposed to do? It's completely sincere fears, like completely sincere, like valid. Yeah, these are valid fears. These are valid fears. Yeah. So, you know what I would say here is that if that kind of a fear is present, there is already some part of you that knows this, right? Or the fear wouldn't be there. The resistance wouldn't be there if some part of us didn't know. I'm supposed to be living this different life. You just know. But I can't because da 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 da. That is shame. It's from conditioning. We come by it very honestly. We also live in a culture and in systems that do make it very difficult to trust in what feels like a path that we're meant for, like legit valid, legit valid fears, And like, that is not one I recommend rushing to confront, because one does need quite a lot of evidence of being able to care for yourself and hold yourself through whatever might unfold. And these are the things that I teach in all my classes, is how to become that person now, so that you can just follow the path that feels like it's laying down for you, and you can no longer carry the grief of self-abandonment that comes from year after year ignoring the voices that tell you this is not the life I'm supposed to be living. So, unshaming your chart is an approach that does invite you to notice what's true, name what's true, and validate what's true, but it doesn't tell you about urgency to act on anything. Unshaming is not a program for kinds of action on certain kinds of timelines. It's a protector part of us that has fear that if we see some truth, we're going to have to see all truth, and then we're going to have to change everything all at once. You see how black and white that is? That's when we have a part of us that's trying to protect us. It's a young perspective. That's why it's black and white. But unshaming is an approach for maturing. It's a maturing perspective. It's very much inspired by Saturn. And Saturn helps us with maturity. And so from a mature perspective, there's no urgency here. There's no timeline. There's no rush. We can go at any pace we want. We can only just see the most appropriate thing to see at any given moment, according to our current capacity to be with what we see. And so what I would say is that unshaming your chart is not going to ask you to do anything in terms of make decisions, say yes or no. It's really more about cultivating the practice to just be able to see truth that's coming forward from a part of you that was previously hidden. And because that part of you is now in conversation with you, you take up more space. And what comes from that is more empowerment, more sense of self-trust, more sense that you are the one protecting yourself and caring for yourself and giving yourself permission as the fucking adult that you are. And that there's nothing wrong with you. You're a human who is learning how to be here. Okay, I have a few more I wanted to share with you. So another one that can be very true is this, I think, is especially for yeah, this is like similar a little bit to the last one, is that there can be a fear when we approach our chart from an unshaming perspective. We can actually be really afraid of the power that it's going to show us, because we can be afraid that we won't have the excuses or the explanations for our perceived failures if we are going to be asked to unshame all the parts of our chart, including the parts that we pointed to as the reasons why XYZ failure problem in our lives. So that's completely that's a completely valid fear, because we can build our whole lives around the story of our failures and the story of our badness and the story of our problems. And so even as we may be like ostensibly wanting to be empowered, and we may be wanting to manifest our dreams, and we maybe want to feel like quote unquote successes, the known thing is going to always be the thing that keeps us safe. And the thing that keeps us safe then is the story of our failures. And the chart can, if we want it to, provide explanations for those things. So an unshaming perspective is going to be one that challenges that some, because it's also going to be asking us to see how our previously perceived problems are actually our powers, and how the things that we thought were wrong with us are actually part of our gifts and our service for this world. Thus, there's no excuse, which has a Saturnian flavor to it, because I'm a Saturn girl. So, what happens then is it's going to be unshaming your chart is going to be an approach that invites you to take responsibility for all of the gifts in your chart, including the ones you previously thought were not gifts. Now, you're allowed to wish you had never had the experiences that led to your shaming of those placements and parts of your chart. You're allowed to wish you'd never had the experiences of your pain. Nobody is suggesting that you're supposed to swallow that and just be grateful, because that is shame rhetoric. No. Unshaming is a practice that holds grief in one hand and wonder in the other. And so no one's bypassing grief and rage here in my space, because those are feelings. And unshaming is a feeling practice. It is unshaming the fact that we are humans who feel. And some of our feelings are uncomfortable. And some of our feelings bring up sadness. And we maybe grew up in families, in group systems that shamed crying, that shamed vents, that shamed frustrations as unsocial, difficult, embarrassing, weak. And the unshaming is very much a vulnerability practice, which in itself can be very, very confronting if you've been taught to shame the fact that you're vulnerable. Because you are, because you're alive. And being alive is vulnerable, because we have always the capacity to be wounded, the capacity to be very hurt, the capacity to be killed. You know, it is a vulnerable thing to be alive. So to pretend that we're not vulnerable is a huge lie. We're not lying to ourselves here. It's a vulnerable thing to be alive, and it's very brave in our culture to be with our vulnerabilities openly. Vulnerability leads to aliveness. Unshaming is an aliveness practice. All right, I have a couple more fears I was going to speak to. Yeah, this one can be for folks who already have a relationship to astrology and to their charts. This approach can cast doubt on the relationship that you believe you already have built to your chart and to astrology. And it can feel vulnerable to the parts of you that are like, I'm good. I already have this. I already know this. Um, like I don't need, I my relationship to astrology is perfect. Because that is a protector part. Anytime that we were like, that we're like so sure about things, that's protection. But what I would say is your protection has intelligence. Like maybe that's really important. So you don't have to fight it. And I'm not shaming you for having protection, you know? And if you're curious about working with your protector parts, because I personally find working with your protector parts to be like the most empowering thing you can do in your life. We've set up these protections. We don't even recognize them as such. We just think they're part of our personality. So working with the parts of you that are protecting you from the vulnerability of like, maybe I don't know everything about my chart. Maybe I don't know everything about astrology. That is inviting you into the vulnerability of not being an expert, the vulnerability of not knowing everything. And we live in a culture that values expertise and centers expertise so much that it's part of shame culture to think that like, if you can get expert enough, then you'll be safe. I mean, I know all about this coming from academia. My crisis in my PhD program in my 30s was finishing coursework and realizing like, I don't know everything. Yeah, it sounds funny to say now, but I literally had a crisis in my identity because it was like, I think I thought I was going to get to a place where I just know everything. Like, uh, the more questions I ask, the more questions I have. Just like when I was learning French, living in France, I came over there thinking I was fluent. And the more I lived there, the more I was like, I am not fluent. Because the more you learn, the more you see there is to learn. Now I embrace this. This is my favorite thing about astrology. This is my favorite thing about my work is like, there's always more to learn and I don't have to know everything. But that's the permission I gave myself from unshaming. It was unshaming that allowed me to be like, you know what? I do not have to know everything. I don't have to have all these answers. I don't have to do it like other people. I don't have to say things right or wrong in astrology. I don't have to do astrology a right way or I'm like kicked out. A lot of astrology is just like any other field in academia where there's this sense of like rules and it has to be done a certain way. You have to talk about it a certain way. And like, I see that and I'm not gonna play into it because I left academia to get out of that. So here for subjective relationships to astrology that are feeling based, that arise from your intuitive relationship to your own listening practice that may or may not sound like what other people say, that what's in the books. And I say this with the contradiction that I love the books and I love learning the techniques and I love learning the history and I love getting more technical actually, because all of this is paradoxical and unshaming because that's how we get real vast. To get back to that fear, what I would invite you into is like, what would it be like to play again and play at turning to your chart as if for the first time and let it speak to you from a wonder place and a curiosity place. And what if you don't actually have to know everything about your chart and about astrology to have value in this community space? And that's something that I really like to have as an energy that flourishes in my containers, but it's also very confronting for those of us, including people like me, who grew up feeling safe by being the smartest in the room and by knowing the most in the room. And so if that's not what's giving you value in the community, then we're left with the terror of like, what actually is my value? And that is a crisis and a confrontation that is worth having when you're ready for it, because it will help you feel into and become approachable where your value really is. It's in your presence. It's just your presence. So that's how we get close to our sun, actually, S-U-N. Last one is related. There can be a fear that if you get into learning your chart and connected in astrological communities, that you won't fit in because you don't perceive yourself as blank, which is how you think astrology communities are. Maybe you think that they're full of nerdy, smart people and you're not a nerdy, smart person. Or maybe you think they're full of like really fascinating, creative bohemians and you're not a fascinating, creative bohemian. Maybe you think they're full of like really magical, fairy, sprite-like beings who somehow have all this connection to the astral that you just do not understand. Well, all of those things are constructions of your own egoic fears. That's what I would say. Like this isn't to shame our projections. We all do it. It's a form of protection. Again, these are all about protections. It's a form of protection to keep you safe because it's so terrifying to not belong. It's so terrifying to feel like an outsider. And also we get so used to feeling like an outsider that it's terrifying to actually feel like you're part of something. We cute humans. We cute humans. So what I would say is that I think I can say I've heard other people say it, so I'm going to say it, that my communities don't have types. My communities don't have categories. I really never liked those things myself. I've always had disparate friends who are all very different from one another, who may belong to kind of like category of groups, but I don't personally belong to the groups that they also belong to. I really like people just coming in as themselves and like leave identities at the door. What's confronting about that is if you want to bring your identity in to feel safe, and you can, just see how it feels. You can only ever explore and get the data, you know? So one of my teachings is to become a person of evidence, which is to just go and get data. The data is the evidence. So if you haven't joined an astrological community space before, then you don't have evidence. Maybe you have, and you do have evidence, and you didn't like it, but you have. But with whatever offering I'm putting forward to you, what I would invite you to do is decide if you're up for getting evidence, because maybe the evidence is going to be really amazing. Would you rather be certain, or would you rather be amazed? You know, this is a central question. And what I would say about shame is that most of us have lived lives where we have we've been certain about one thing: our badness, our not enoughness, our imperfectness. And if you are interested in cultivating a magical life, a mystical life, that is going to entail uncertainty. That is going to entail not having all the answers. And that is going to entail being open to the possibility that you don't know everything. And so unshaming your chart is an exploration of your chart, of this business of connecting to astrology for all learning levels with astrology, that invites you into the practices that are lifelong practices for being mystical, magical, multidimensional beings. And to do that, we need to bring more of ourselves out. And the reason that these parts of us are hiding is because of shame and all the protector parts of us that are keeping them hidden. We can have compassion for the intelligence of our younger selves who learned to move these parts out of sight. But here in present time, here in the day that we're in now, we're learning new tools for new ways of being, cultivated with more trust in ourselves and in the universe that's guiding us. If you're interested in joining me in this experiment, I hope that you will enroll in Unshaming Your Chart. Again, we begin December 18th. We will really kick into charts in January. If you see this after December 18th, the doors will still be open. Just catch the replay and hop on in with us. I'm so excited. I'm honored. I'm a little scared. Why would I be scared? Because this feels very big for me. It feels like a big culmination of all these things I've been learning. And anytime that we're riding the edges of something really powerful for us, we tend to be scared. And that's okay, because I bring my feelings with me wherever I go. That's what unshaming has helped me learn how to do. And that's why I go to some pretty cool places these days, is because I unshame the fact that I don't know everything. I am kind of scared. I may get hurt. I may make a mistake, but I'm excited to see what happens and have a good time while I do it. I hope you'll join me. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.